Hey everybody! In today's video, I'm going to show you how to make bright, primary colored vintage cards. Now, when I first started stamping, the style that I was most drawn to was vintage style cards. It was very in vogue then, and there were lots of layers, but what there wasn't was a lot of color. So even though I wanted to make that style of card, I just wasn't attracted to all the brown that was in what was called vintage cards at the time. So I am going to show you how to make vintage style sort of collage cards, but with the bright colors that I love in both Distress Oxides and Distress Inks. So I'm going to show you a way to create a vintage collage working from sort of subtle to detailed. So I'll begin with the background. Now I've wet both sides of a piece of watercolor paper that I cut with this cute stitched postage die. And I'm using a piece of acetate to apply pumice stone Distress Oxide ink. And when I do these backgrounds, I always start with the oxides and then I work my way to distress inks. I'm going from sort of soft to sharp in the background, and you'll see what I mean as it progresses. So if you just pick up the wet Distress Oxides and put it onto the wet watercolor paper with a piece of acetate, you get something that looks very much like marble. So this is just the first layer, a light gray marble. And then I will go back with Hickory Smoke Distress Oxides. Again, I haven't transitioned to the Distress Inks yet, but I'm just adding a darker color on top of the lighter color. So it's a background to foreground technique. Now I'm always fighting the air conditioner, and so you will see me spraying this while I'm applying the ink with the acetate. And that's just because it's drying really, really quickly. And at this point in the background, I just want soft details. I don't want the sharp details yet. So I'm using the gray on all four cards, even though these are all going to be a different color. The gray in the background just gives it a lot of structure. So once those are dry, I'll start working on the colored portion. And again, I will start with Distress Oxides before I move to the dye inks. Now this time I'm putting a Distress Oxide reinker directly onto the acetate and spraying the card. And then I will apply the ink all over the wet cardstock, and that will sort of blend in and apply my base color. Be sure and clean your mat and clean the acetate before you move to the next color, and make sure with Distress Oxides that you're shaking the reinker really well before you start this so that it's mixed and you get a good even application. So there's that beautiful picked raspberry. And I know these aren't traditional vintage colors, but we're going to change the world of vintage with this today. And put some bright, happy primary colors into a vintage card. So the last one is Mustard Seed, and I will actually dry these a little bit before moving on to Distress Ink. So see how you have that nice soft background, and the Distress Ink brings like a sharpness to the last layer of the background. Well, not really the last layer, as you'll see. This is a layering process, so there are going to be a few more elements added to the background. But I love the distinction between the soft Distress Oxides and the sort of crisper marks that are made by Distress Ink. And one of the most awesome things about what Ranger has done with these is how perfectly Distress Ink matches Distress Oxides. Even though they're two different mediums, it's kind of amazing how well they match. So you will have a difference in detail, but you're not going to have a difference in color, which is, for me, the way that I designed these super important. So there is the Mustard Seed one. I will do the last one, which is Peacock Feathers. This is my holy trinity in all things distress, is these three inks together. So I will add the dye ink over the top, and this almost gives it a splattered look, but you have a little bit more control because you're using that acetate and you're directing the dye ink wherever you would like it to go. What did we do before craft mats that we could just wipe up? Now there is this beautiful vintage set. I'm actually going to be using a couple of sets that she came out with that have vintage details because there are different types of script and postal marks and different things in this set. And I'm going to talk about why I use the different scripts in just a minute. Now, the cool thing about clear stamps is you don't really need a block to use them, as I'm going to show you. So again, on this second phase of the background, I'm doing the same thing. I'm going from soft to sharper. So I'm starting with pumice stone, and it's very subtle here, especially on camera. But when you see the close-up, you'll see how much detail this adds to the open areas of the background. So I'm sort of focusing on where there isn't any blue ink and adding this beautiful script to the background. So see, you can see that detail, very subtle, and we'll put some more prominent details on top of that, but this is a building process. So I'll do the same thing, go into the open areas with pumice stone, and the stamp is just stuck to my hand. Your hand is the block, especially if you have a brand new set. This was a brand new set to me, and so it sticks to your hand really well, and you have a lot of control. Now this is a very tight script, so the lines aren't very far apart. And I'll sort of show you why that's better for the subtle background in just a second when you see the difference. So there you can see the yellow one. That looks great. And then I will switch inks to the Hickory Smoke, which is just a little darker shade of gray. And I'm going to use this canceled postage stamp and add a little bit more detail. Again, my hand is the stamping block. It sticks so well. And now we're starting to get into a foreground. So now these sort of become the focus and everything else goes into the background because it's a darker, little bit darker gray ink. So I'll stamp these all over. I love this little stamp. I'm obsessed with all things postage, on vintage stamps especially. Now here you can see the difference between the background stamp that I used, which is very tightly spaced lines and small script, and the one on the right that has a lot more space between the lines. And so in the background, it's okay with that pale color for it to be sort of a little bit busier with that tighter spacing. But in the foreground, I need that bigger space with the darker ink because I don't want to detract from what's actually my focal points. So I don't know if that's what she intended with this set, probably because she's kind of a genius, but it's certainly the way that I work when I'm building up backgrounds like this. And it really helps to have script, if you love script, but in a couple of different spacing orientations so you can decide if it's your background or your foreground. So on the gray one, I'm just doing the sort of darker gray. I didn't do all the detailing that I did on the others, but I did add the postage stamps. I actually really love the gray one. I think the gray one ends up being my favorite, even though this video is all about bright colors. Now I die cut some of the smaller stamp shapes that come with this die set, and I'm just going to make stamps that are colored very faintly in the same colors, and I'm going to use them in a complementary color scheme on each of these little cards. So I'll just dip these in ink. I'm going to mix a few of the inks so that you get a little bit of both. I really love the picked raspberry and the mustard seed together where they make that orange. It's really, really pretty. And then I'll do one that's gray for the gray stamp. Now I've stamped and die cut some of the images that I'm going to be using, and I haven't colored them yet. I'm going to show you the whole design process here, including a lot of indecision about what collage elements I'm going to put on the card. But it'll kind of give you an idea of how many times it takes me really to decide what I'm going to put on a card. Now that one I'm really happy with. This is a package of ephemera that I bought on Etsy, and I'll put it in the comments below. I'm not sure if it's still available, but you can get ephemera all over Etsy, and I sort of just go with themes. So I go and look for nature ephemera or people ephemera or letters. You can find a lot of handwritten letters and things like that. And those are always fun on vintage cards. So when I was die cutting this bird, the die slipped, and I'm going to show you how I did not throw this little bird in the trash. I just sort of went with it. It's actually a really easy fix. So you'll see that I stamped in very light amalgam ink here, and so you're not seeing the details. I'm just putting down the base color, but I did keep the template that I die cut everything out of. And I usually do this when I get dies. I don't even cut the dies apart unless they're nested. I just cut a template and then I stick it in the stamp pocket, and that's always there so that I can stamp over die cut images that I've colored over, or if I just feel like stamping them with a template just to make sure they're precise. So I overstamped him with a gray ink, and then I'm going to finish some of the details. And here I'm just eliminating the white line because that's where it was off kilter a little bit when it slipped in the die cutting machine. And then I'm just going to add a yellow border on the other side so it just blends in. You don't even notice that mistake. Definitely a way to come back from that. So now I'll color the little butterfly. And again, I'm trying to make the focal points, with the exception of one, in a complementary color to the background. So the blue bird will go on the yellow background, and the yellow butterfly will go on the blue background, etc. I'm just doing a very subtle sort of ombre on this butterfly with a little bit of orange. I'm not doing any detailed coloring at all here. I'm just going to let the stamp detail speak for itself. So this takes literally zero skill to do what I'm doing here, which comes in super handy. So I will blend this out, and then the rest of the detail, the antennas and the body and all of that, that will be put back in with stamping. And again, I'll just pop that into the template and overstamp that with my gray ink. And I'm going to stamp the butterfly twice just to get a little bit more detail, so it'll almost look black when it's finished. So I'm hemming and hawing a little bit about what's going to go behind each of these. The little lady that I picked was perfect for one of them, but I was a little bit indecisive about some of these other ones. I didn't want the cardstock that I had die cut these with to be a bright, bright white. So I do end up coloring those with a Copic marker, kind of an eggshell marker, to match the background. Now here I made the lady a little bit smaller. I got rid of that border. It was like a photo border. So I cut that off and then colored the die cut sentiment. And now I think that one is almost perfect. I will be adding some gilding flakes just because in my mind, gilding is a vintage technique anyway. And then it adds a little bit of sparkle and shine to the card, which is also something you don't really think of as vintage. So I'm just breaking all the vintage rules while still having a vintage look on this card. Now I use Tombow Mono Multi with my gilding flakes because it's a two-way glue. So even when it's dry, it's sticky. And so that makes it perfect for applying gilding flakes or foil. If I'm just gluing something, I use any old white glue, but two-way glue is especially useful for gilding flakes. So that one is basically finished. I am happy with that. If you find a little extra sticky spot that you missed, just stick a gilding flake on that and it will be perfect. Now, each of the postage stamps does have stamps that you can stamp onto them. So I am doing that. Same, just using a light gray ink there because I don't want it to fight with the focal point. And this is where I'm really making a few decisions and then overriding them. I put some gesso on this paper because I felt like it was too brown and it didn't really match the background. And then I ditched that idea entirely. So the first thing I wanted to do was give like a branch feeling with the gilding flake. So I'm just doing a line of glue and then I'll apply silver gilding flakes. And that's sort of like the idea that the bird is sitting on a branch. And I felt like a good horizontal line would look better here. So I'm giving up on that little piece of paper, but I'll stick it back in my ephemera box and it'll be ready for something else that it works a lot better with. So I took some music books that I have and tore little strips of a vertical to sort of contrast with that strong horizontal line I have with the gilding flakes. And then I can put the bird there on its little silvery branch. And I think that looks great. I think it looks better than that other collage paper did. So I love these two. So much fun. So now on to the butterfly, which looks great against that peacock feathers background. And I'll add a little gilding flakes here too. This is sort of a card set, so I wanted them to be unified by a couple of these details. The backgrounds are pretty unified anyway, but this would be a fun little gift set to give to somebody who does love that vintage look. The silver, I just found I was drawn to the silver on a couple of these backgrounds. The first one I really loved the gold, but I feel like these were kind of cooler cards, and then the foreground was warmer with that butterfly, so I felt like it needed silver in the background for contrast. And then I will just stick that little butterfly down. Some of these won't even need greetings. I think they're pretty just the way they are. I did put a greeting on that one with the little lady, but I think other than that, I might just leave them without sentiments and just write on the inside. Now, pink and silver is one of my favorites because it's just a riff on pink and gray. And on this one, I just put little teeny dots of glue instead of the larger areas of glue that I had on the other cards, because that pink is so pretty and dominant. I didn't want to compete with that. This one is getting a strip of the music paper as well. And then the little watch that I colored with a marker and the little cute little pop of yellow on there. So here are all 4 of them finished. I love them. Perfect vintage without any brown. So if that's what you're into, take a look at these close up and then head over to my blog for more information. And thanks so much for watching.